Rule Ash learned the grammar of bees before he learned the alphabet of men. Dawn on Marchfield meant the slow unscrolling of light over the cane brakes and the lofted haze above the Tupelo trees, meant the river talking in a tongue that changed with wind and tide, meant the hive's loam coming up through the boards like a warming prayer. He had always listened harder than he spoke, because listening was the first work of survival, and silence could be a shelter. In the hush before the yard woke, he pressed his ear to the hive and felt the colony as a living drum. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. His palm, scar-crossed and nimble, slid over the lid as if calming a fretful horse. The bees kept his secrets as well as he kept theirs, where the queen walked, how the brood warmed, when nectar ran up the river like gold flooding a church. The others laughed that he was all honey and no meat, thin as a spindle, but a boy like Rule survived by lightness. Where heavy anger bent most backs, he learned to bend time, count breath, count steps, count the days since the last beating and the distance to the next harvest. He had turned 12 that winter and did not mark it except by the way his hands fit the smoker better and his body moved faster between the hives before the overseer's shadow grew tall. Marchfield lay 2 miles inland from the brackish river with its slow barges and quicker roomers, a plantation stitched into the muddy scene where rice fields breathed and the pine barrens began. The master, Gordant March, called the bees his side earnings, a hobby with profit, and had set 3 rows of hives along the orchard where pears blushed early and late. The big money was in rice and bodies. The sweeter coin became Rule's world because March tired of the stings and the fuss. Let the boy waste his zeal on insects, March told the overseer, Shanks before he left and then Kelling after, each a different machine with the same product, so long as he pulls weight come harvest. Rule heard, measured, and made a map in his head. He drew it in wax when he dared, soft lines he could erase with a thumb. He had learned his letters in hiding, skimming them off a tattered almanac used to wick oil and catch grease beneath a sputtering lamp. The book smelled of smoke and salt pork, and its pages were bruised the way people here were bruised, hard use, in different hands. 1 letter at a time, he copied with the tip of a willow twig into the wax scraps he rendered after honey days, hardening them under the bed planks, scraping them clean when patrols or the master's boy strutted by. He traced the lines from memory while the bees sang, and the songs tangled until letters felt like living things, loops and stems became little bodies clinging to a queen. The bees taught him order. The river taught him change. And his mother, who was never allowed to teach him anything, taught him how to keep a mouth shut as if it held a bird that must not fly too soon. She had been sold south when he was 8, a blunt stroke that left the air forever a little thinner. Rule did not weep where eyes could see it, he put the missing into work. He walked the hive rows like a priest and prayed by doing. In March, when the wisteria purled from the fence rails and the river smelled like fish and metal, Rule made split boxes from cast-off boards in the carpentry shed. They were not his boards to claim, and so he moved as a shadow does around solid bodies, only there when light looked elsewhere. He bored entrance holes with a dull auger and rubbed the rims with crushed mint to confuse the old hive's scent and keep fighting down. He was small enough to pass beneath notice and quick enough that when notice fell upon him, it found only a boy with a steady hand, good with smoke, which any man believed was a useful thing to keep. The new overseer arrived with April heat. They called him Kelling, no one used his first name, and he came with a scar that crossed his cheek like a poorly sewn seam. He had the particular calm of men who cherished their own anger like a tool kept sharp, folded away in a leather roll until needed. Shanks had been a drunk, the lash fell where the bottle tipped. Kelling measured. He watched first. He made lists in his head. He asked questions that forced men to answer with their necks. And when he finally used the whip, he did not shout. Rule learned his gait and breath the way he learned the bees' weather. He traced the overseer's path from the rice levees to the stable to the cool shadow of the main house where white noise from the master's meals, silver and laughter and cold talk, breathed like a creature. He learned that Kelling's right boot was missing a hobnail and clicked faintly on the brick walk by the well. He learned the timbre of Kelling's voice when he spoke kindly to the little white boy, Sumner March, and the timbre when he questioned an older woman about a missing ladle. At night, Rule lay on the pallet in the loft of the honey house and practiced letters on his thigh with a finger. He wrote the word river. Then the word north. He wrote the name Rule not to claim it but to confirm the fact of himself. The bees slept in their slow-breathing way, 1,000 purpose-filled dreams in each brood box, and their warm exhalations made the honey house smell like bread and summer paint. He learned the seasons by taste on his tongue. Tupelo was early, silk-sweet, gallberry came later with a green edge, the marsh blooms muddied honey with brine. If he could learn the calendar without a book, he could learn the country without a road. The first time he saw the riverboat man, the bees were hot with a sudden squall, and Rule held the smoker like a ritual horn, puffing clouds of moss smoke through the lids so the colony would gorge in quiet. The man leaned on the fence where the orchard met the world and watched without speaking. He had the posture of someone who found attention useful but not necessary. His boat, moored in the canal cut, wore a ragged sail, his hands were scarred in the way of rope and honest mischief. "Keep your face calm," the man said finally, not looking at Rule but at the hives as if they were the ones that needed the warning. "A face speaks into the future." Rule glanced once and away. The overseer's tally bell was distant. The man took a twist of tobacco and chewed, eyeing the bees as if measuring a trade. "Heard tell you keep them gentled," he said. "Gentle's good until it ain't." "I listen," Rule murmured. He rarely spent words on men he did not know. The man nodded like this confirmed something he'd wagered on. "Jonah Pike," he said. "I haul rice upriver and brick down. Haul stories both ways. Sometimes I carry what ain't mine, given it's wanted where it's headed." Rule kept his face a still pond. He watched the man's mouth say "ain't mine" and what moved behind the words. He thought of letters as bees again, short ones you could catch on the tongue, long ones with tails and stings. "You write?" Jonah asked suddenly. Rule wiped his wrist across his forehead and considered. "No use in that here. Use comes in strange seasons." Jonah spat into the weeds. "If a boy were to copy down that a boat leaves second Sabbath night when the tide turns, from the brick wharf, say, and hand that scrap to a woman who bakes on Tuesdays, and if that woman were to pass it beneath a pie plate to a man with shoe tools, why then, what the boy wrote would find its feet." There was a way men tested boys, to see if there was a body underneath all that compliance. Some boys grew a shell that fit so tight it starved them. Others cracked early and were used up. Rule had learned to be supple, which is another way to say stubborn when the wind howls. He flicked his eyes to Jonah. "Shoes make tracks," he said, so light it almost wasn't said. Jonah Pike's grin was narrow, like the slit of a shutter. "Aye. And prints can stack until they look like a road if you squint." That night Rule wrote on wax. He used the edge of a bone needle and scratched small letters shallow enough to melt away with one press of the thumb if anyone not meant to read them ever lifted his board. He wrote, "Brick Wharf. Second Sabbath. Tide turn. Pie." He tucked the thin slate beneath the corner of the honey sieve. In the morning he asked to carry honey to the big house, showed the cook, Letty, with hands like river anchors, the notch in the crock where ants had found the sugar. He replaced the lid with one that did not squeak. His eyes said nothing. Letty's eyes replied nothing twice, which means something. Rule went back to the hives and watched the country move around him, the blackbirds in the cane, the far-off shape of a patrol rider, the way the master's boy laughed with his mouth open and his eyes closed. In the honey house that night, Rule ran his finger over the wax tablet until the words blurred. In his head the words did not blur. In his head, they kept their shape like bees know their queen in the dark. The first taking happened 2 Sabbaths later, so clean that Rule thought he had imagined it. Ellie, who washed linens and whose wrists always smelled faintly of lye and soapweed, was simply gone by Monday's sunup, and the original story was that she had been lent to a neighbor for the week, which was not uncommon. Then Tuesday the cook Letty burned a pie one could not burn and scrubbed the pan as if it had wronged her. By Wednesday, Sumner March asked idly in Rule's hearing where Ellie had gone because his collar had been starched too stiff by the new girl, and Kelling said, in that careful voice, that Ellie had lost her place by trying to find one elsewhere, and Master March made us sound like a man who had stepped in mud, irritable but not undone. He fined a lot of them for the trouble. Ellie was gone into the marsh of stories where people go when they are not allowed to be where they must be. Rule kept the bees calm and his face calm and his heart a careful drum. He learned to write thin as hair. He learned to hide the tablets where wax belonged, in candle ends and fake comb that smelled right but held a message. He learned that Letty could pass a thing to Cobbler Ray by saying nothing to his face and everything with the way she set a plate on the sill. He learned that Jonah Pike kept to the second Sabbath more often than not, which is as close to a promise as men like Jonah give, and that he moved small numbers, which is what kept it possible. Quiet stitches, not banners. Rule learned the word fidelity from a psalm book with a broken spine someone had used to level a table. He copied it in wax until he could spell it with 3 blinks in a breath. When Kelling caught him one afternoon with a scrap of wax marked up like a field of tiny furrows, Rule said it was a tally of brood frames, and he said it with the calm that made his lies like a still lake that reflects any sky. Kelling took the wax, turned it in his fingers, sniffed it as if scent could pull secrets up from silent things. He handed it back with a manner almost gentle. "You keep your order," Kelling said. "The master likes men who keep quiet order. Bees sting fools. I favor stings only where needed." That was when Rule understood that Kelling read people like brand marks on cattle, ownership first, then temperament. He wondered if Kelling could read letters. He wondered if Kelling could read him. Summer fattened everything and then thinned it with fever. Wisteria turned to heat-shocked vines. The river ran thick. Rice turned gold and brittle. People went sick and hollow, their sweat smelled different, like pennies held too long in the fist. The master had a doctor and twice, and he bled 2 men who did not have the blood to spare and dosed 3 women with calomel until their mouths went raw as winter. Rule tended the weak with honey and water because it was what he had in his hands. He brought comb to the nursery where babies wheezed into the quarter where old Rye coughed up pieces of himself and laid them in a rag like offerings. Honey is good for burns and for throats, it is less good for chains. One dusk, when the sky had the bruised look of a plum handled too much, Rule found Sumner March at the Hive row, fat hand over a lid, listening. The boy could be sweet as sugar water and mean as a wasp come noon, his kindness was whatever entertained him. "They talk," Sumner said, eyes blue as weather. "What do they say?" "They say everything at once." Rule's answer did not ask him to hear it. Sumner grinned. "I'll tell father you keep them fine. That'll keep you clean." His grin tilted. "You ever run?" Rule kept his fingers still at his side. "Not smart to run where the dogs live. Dogs bite." Sumner shrugged. "Bees just sting. Enough stings can kill a horse." Sumner's mouth rounded at the picture. He liked pictures. Could they kill a man? Rule thought of Ellie running. He thought of Jonah Pike's narrow smile and of the way a colony rose up like a single throat when the queen was threatened. He looked at Sumner March, who had never doubted his own safety, whose softness was built on the hungry work of others. "More than one thing can kill a man," he said. It was the most true thing he'd spoken aloud in a week. Kelling's lists turned to Rule's. He found a missing spoon and made a whipping of it anyway because the spoon had been missing too long. He cut sleep short and meals shorter. He spoke to the master about discipline, and the master listened because crop margins make men listen harder than sermons. A patrolman was brought on in regular circuit through the quarters at night under the premise that outside threats were thick, which made the inside threat fidget with his need to move. Rule tightened his circle. He passed only short words. He did not write north for a while because the air around that word felt like dawn before a storm, too charged to touch. The thing that changed him from keeping to disrupting was small as a beetle, a book knocked from a shelf by Sumner in one of his sprees through the quiet rooms of the big house. Rule was in the hall with a honey bowl, face bland as the wall, when the boy swatted at a fly and sent the book loping down the shelf and onto the rug. Pages bent, the spine popped. Rule stooped at once and lifted it back smooth as he could, and his eyes by habit read. He was learning to read faster then, letters untying themselves quicker under his gaze. The book was about bees. Not the almanac kind with scant lines under woodcut moons, but a true treatise, printed in Philadelphia, with diagrams like prayer. Sumner took it, flipped it, bored by anything that did not move like a frog. Father says bees are a fad. He tossed it onto a chair. Rule memorized the title and 3 lines of the first paragraph by the time the book closed. He walked the honey bowl into Letty's domain, set it beside the pies, and when no one looked he repeated the lines in his mouth until they were seed. That night, in the honey house, he wrote them on wax and hid them in the floor. The lines spoke of how hives could be moved at night if the bees were calmed and the entrance sealed with cloth and smoke, and how a horse's step with steady gait could keep a colony from roaring inside its box. They spoke of queen cages woven of willow. They spoke of ways to drive bees, not as pets but as allies. He had always loved them like a boy loves a thing that gives him a life. That night he loved them like a boy loves a thing that might give him a way to make other lives. He slept with the wax tablet beneath his cheek, letters leaving faint marks on his skin that a lesser man might call bruises. The next weeks he practiced moves that looked like chores. He built 2 more split boxes, this time with small sliding gates at the entrance that could be pinned open, then loosed. He designed the pins from bits of fencing wire scavenged near the swamp. He made a satchel of burlap lined with wet moss that could hold 2 queen cages without crushing them. He trained his hands to fit the work in dark without light, in case light brought questions. He told no one, not even Letty. Secrets kept people alive but also kept them lonely. Rule learned the loneliness like he learned the spring, something you work through. He grew taller that summer in a sudden fit, long bone and tendon like a deer, his face sharp where it had been round. Men stopped calling him little. Kelling started calling him B-boy with the edge of ridicule one blade away from respect. When Jonah Pike next came to the fence, he brought a question wrapped in a story. "You hear about the Cracknell place," he said, plucking a wisteria vine to smell it. "Queen's cousin married to a man with kind eyes and a black book. A fire took their barn last month, the kind that starts up high on a windless night. Fire is hungry. Folks say it eats different when it is set to purpose." Rule studied him without turning his head. "I hear wind." Jonah rolled the vine between his fingers. "Some men talk loud because they want you to hear only the words. Some whisper so that you hear the wanting. The Cracknell fire burned up a whip and 2 sets of shackles. That's what the story says. That's how the wanting sounds." He flicked the vine away and looked at Rule full on. "There are more than one road north. Some go by water like clocks. Some go by dogs' noses. Some," he tipped his chin at the hives. "Well, stings itch more on a white man. He's got soft skin. I won't burn the bees." The shirty surprised Rule with its own heat. "I won't harm what I'm bound to." Jonah's smile did not move much, but his eyes did. "I didn't ask you to. Men like me don't ask. We mention weather. Boys like you decide whether to harvest." He turned away. Second Sabbath. Tide turns late. A month later Letty's nephew was sold for spitting when the master's boy spit first. That was not why they said they sold him, that is simply what happened 2 days before, which is how cause and story diverge on places like Marchfield. The sale broke something quietly efficient in Letty. She moved in the kitchen like a clock with a missing tooth, catching now and then, and the food grew off by half a measure. The master complained and then remembered himself and stopped complaining because men like him needed Letty more than they needed their own satisfaction. Rule brought her comb and the kind of listening that has weight. "You writing your little notes?" she asked, voice low. "Only where needed." "You going to write one to bring my boy back?" Rule's breath tightened. This was where boys broke or grew. "I can write one to make it cost them more to take the next," he said. "I can write one to keep us together longer until the next time there is a boat." She regarded him out of eyes that had not often been given the luxury of hope. "Sometimes I look at you and I see the child you were. Other times I see a man wearing that child like a coat he can't take off." She wiped her hands. "You be careful. Men like Kelling hear footsteps in sand." Kelling heard more than that. Twice he appeared at the edge of the orchard in the blue hour with the look of a man testing a fence. Once he asked Rule to open a hive so he could watch. "I've a mind to start a few boxes myself," Kelling said. It ain't hard to coax a little sugar out of a back acre. Farmers upstate keep bees beside cows. Rule used smoke and spoke what a boy in his place could say without breaking anything that mattered. He showed Kelling the frames and the brood and the honey arching like amber windows. He kept his fingers sure and his eyes dull. Kelling listened, and Rule felt the listening like a blade held flat. At harvest, Master March put on a little fete to taste the new honey with wine and late pears, and the guests said the things guests say, that it was divine, and that nature's industry put idle man to shame, and that the boy had a gift. Rule stood in the corner of the serving door and let their words pass over him like flies. Sumner sidled up and whispered questions into his sleeve. Somewhere in the night the river took a boat. Autumn brought relief to skin and breath. Rule split 2 strong colonies and prepared for winter with burlap and sugar bricks stacked near. He wrapped the hives when the first frost smoked the furrows, and he felt heroic the way boys do when they secure small kingdoms against cold. He did not yet know winter would bring a different kind of cold. It came early, on a night so clear the stars rang like iron. Kelling pulled Cobbler Ray from his bed and accused him of something that might even have been true: passing messages, bent nails, seditious shoes. The word seditious popped in the overseer's mouth like a new coin. He took Ray to the yard. Men rose like corn in a wind. Letty came and stood with her hands on her hips as if the posture could change gravity. Sumner watched from the edge of the porch with his blanket around him and father behind him with a brandy and a look that said inconvenience more than justice. Ray did not cry. Rule learned a new sound that night: leather when it breaks something under it. He took honey to Ray after, when the yard had closed its eyes and the master had ordered quiet permitted to return. He swabbed the split skin with honey and saw Ray's eyes open to pain and to Rule. "Don't you put yourself in the way of that man," Ray whispered, breath cut short. "Keep your pretty insects and your small joy, boy." "Pretty things bite," Rule said, a whisper back in the dark. Ray laughed once, a sound like a pulled nail. "Winter is work you cannot show." Rule walked paths between the bees and the quarters and kept count: how many frames still heavy despite the cold, how many men with coughs. He kept the letters in his head and only wrote when a message had a place to go. Boats moved slower and snowless cold turned the dirt to punishing glass. The river spoke less and the hive song went quiet and tight. Kelling moved the way a predator does when food runs thin, more efficient, less patient, looking for offense like a man warms his hands. Late in January, Jonah Pike came by on a day cold enough to make men honest. He stood for a long time at the fence chewing nothing and looking at the hives with a sadness Rule felt like a cold finger along his spine. "I move downstream tomorrow," Jonah said finally. "I'll turn again in 3 weeks. There's a woman gathering 2 children to the brick wharf. If you got words, say them on wax and leave them with the spent comb by dusk." Rule nodded and did the arithmetic in his head that had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with courage. He wrote, "Wait under the pilings. 1 whistle. Ratty sail." He cut the tablet thin and tucked it under a wax cap so neat it would fool even himself. He would have left it without trouble if Sumner had not been at the orchard fence then, hands in mittens, breath puffing like a small dragon. "You never get stung," Sumner said, obvious awe in the way children love anything that looks like magic and costs them nothing. Rule said something soft. Sumner leaned closer, mitten on the hive lid, and Rule's back went alive with a knowledge he did not yet own. He moved Sumner's hand without thinking and said, "Don't put your heat where it makes theirs mad." Kelling cleared his throat from behind them. Rule's body learned to be still and his face learned to be a door. "Teaching the boy your tricks?" Kelling asked. His voice had that even pleasantness that meant danger. "Just keeping him from a sting." Rule's voice came out even and low, a river voice. He kept his eyes on the hive, not the man. Kelling let the sound hang. "I'll want you in the rice shed this afternoon." Rule went, because refusing is slow suicide. The rice shed smelled of dust and mouse and old work. Kelling had him lifting bags until his shoulders screamed, then measuring, then reciting the measures back. "You read numbers?" Kelling's glance was sideways, fast as a blade. "Count, yes." Rule kept his breath slow. The bees teach even a fool how to count. Kelling watched his mouth. Keep your count. If I catch letters on you, I'll burn them out. He smiled then, the soft sort. Bees don't help with that. Rule went back to the honey house like a man walking through a field of glass. He considered not leaving the tablet. He imagined the children at the pilings, the woman's breath leaving her chest and going nowhere if no boat came. He hid the tablet in the comb bucket and carried the bucket to Letty's back step. He knocked, 2 short, 1 long. He did not wait for eyes. He set it down and walked. 3 days later word came by the shape of quiet that the woman and 2 children were gone. It came also by the shape of noise. Kelling, angrier because he could not find the mechanism, threw 3 pallets and questioned 6 men and spoke to the master with more heat than a man in his place should risk. He broke a sugar jar and, this was the thing that marked the day in memory, he took Sumner by the shoulder when the boy asked if the children would see snow where they were going and shook him once, not hard, but enough that Sumner yelped. Master March stared at Kelling as if a dog had put its teeth on the wrong shoe. Something shifted, not a large thing, but a hinge moved. Kelling's eyes slid to Rule. A certain math began in the overseer's mind and did not stop. The dog patrols thickened. A new pair of men came through at night with lanterns and leather straps, and they walked with the sour joy of men given power in small doses. Rule changed his routes. He stopped writing anything longer than a point. He cut tablets so thin they melted under the fingers like lies. He counted the hives thrice a day as if he could make safety by inventory. Spring came like a verdict. Everything leafed at once. The bees burst from the boxes in clouds that looked like kingdoms on the move. He set out traps for swarms near the pear arbor and caught 2. He gave Letty a cone the size of a small book, and she held it as if it were a child. "You look taller," she said. He was. Something in him had lengthened and hardened in the cold. He learned to hold anger like you hold a scalpel, too tight and you cut yourself, too loose and you drop it at the wrong time. He spoke less to Sumner and more to the bees. He built a small fence of brush around the hives not to stop men, nothing stops men like Kelling, but to train bees to fly up and over human faces. He made notes in his head where to put the horse, where to set a smoking pot if he had to move boxes after dark. He learned to lift a hive with his legs, not his back. He learned a whisper that soothed the colony when a noise spooked them. He learned to hear when they were about to boil into a swarm, the pitch went sharp, like the point of a blade, and how to offer them a new home at the exact moment choice felt like freedom. He wrote one longer message that spring. It was after Ray healed enough to tie his own apron and after Kelling thinned the stored rice with his own hands to check for rats that weren't there. Rule wrote, midnight. Dog on South Chain Lane. Fence Gap Pineside. He delivered it larded in a candle sent to the seamstress. 2 men were gone by dawn without dogs giving much chase. Kelling lashed the fence post with a fury that made even men who hated him pity the wood. The lash fell again that month, this time on Letty's back, for the crime of a pie that was perfect and late. Rule saw red as if someone had pressed a hot spoon to the back of his eyes. He took it and turned it into work, which is one kind of alchemy. He built a new thing, a series of little gates cut into the hive bottoms that could be pulled open all at once with one cord, like a bell rope. It took him 10 nights to measure and cut and fit and then another 3 to make the cord look like something it had always been. If he tugged it hard, every hive would spill at once. He did not yet know what he would do with that, he only knew what could be done. He slept poorly and dreamed of a river that ran honey instead of water and drowned men in slow gold. Early summer smelt of bruised mint and new sweat. Kelling walked with that circled cat feeling, a man who has set traps and is mad the wind moved them. Summer grew into long legs in the sense that the world would part where he stepped. Master March drank more. The sky stacked heat on heat until even the bees sounded tired. The thing that set the night to burning had nothing to do with plots and everything to do with men. A field hand named Ben pinched a measure of tobacco from the master's own barrel, less than a taste, and Kelling, who had taken his measure long ago and wanted a moment to strike that would ring, decided to make it public. He walked Ben to the whipping post at sundown when all the day's weariness had gathered and men were on the edge of breaking anyway. He called the quarters to witness. He spoke about order. He spoke about example. He spoke about the price of small thefts in tight markets. Master March watched, not drunk but not sober enough to measure his own soul. Rule stood with his hands behind his back and counted the bees still coming home. He counted until numbers felt like splinters. Ben's shoulders shook once and then stilled as if he had stepped outside himself. The first stripe made a sound like the world tearing. Sumner flinched and looked at Rule as if the boy with bees might make the sound stop. Rule looked at the hives. He looked at the rope tucked into the brush fence, hidden except to a hand that knew. He looked at Letty, whose lips moved in a prayer and a curse braided together. During the sixth stripe, a storm shouldered the horizon, a thunderhead like pewter. Rule had watched storms the way he watched hives. He knew the wind would change sudden. He also knew bees dislike thunder. They cut their own song short when the sky growls. He slipped sideways through bodies to the fence. He kept his movement as small as a heartbeat. He knelt as if to tie a shoe he did not own. His fingers found the rope. The bees muttered louder, a choir in a minor key. The seventh stripe fell. Ben made a sound like a man pulling up a root he could not uproot. Kelling's arm lifted. The thunder walked closer on its long legs. Rule's heart stepped out of his chest and then back in. He thought of all the times he had lifted lids with smoke gentle as bedtime. He thought of all the times he had said to the bees, "I will not betray you." He thought of Letty's back and Ray's breath and Ellie's absence like a well in a field where a house should be. He pulled the rope. It did not move. The knot caught on a burr of wood where his knife had been dull that night. He felt the catch like a tooth bite. He tugged harder, and the brush stirred, and someone turned, and Rule lived 3 whole lives in that half-breath, one where he let go, one where he yanked and all the hives woke at once, and one where Kelling saw him and cut him down before the rope moved an inch. Somewhere beyond those lives the thunder finally cracked the air. Kelling's head came around with the exactness of a clockwork. Rule felt the overseer's eyes find his hands not his face, then climb. Rule's fingers were sticky with old propolis, the rope felt like snake skin. He could smell honey and sweat and the copper coin smell of blood. He could hear the bees shift pitch like a choir at the moment of a new verse. He could see Sumner's mouth open with no sound, and Letty's lips stop moving, and Jonah Pike in memory at the fence saying, "Gentle's good until it ain't." Rule yanked. The first gates dropped, 2, then 3, then in a ragged line as the rope slid free of the burr with a lurid squeal. Bees boiled as if the boxes were fountains. They came out in ropes that turned to clouds that turned to a weather of their own. Kelling moved, fast, faster than Rule's heart had prepared for, dropping the whip and going for Rule's shoulder. The thunder rolled over the yard heavy as sin. Men scattered in the deep human way bodies know to run from small rage and are slow to run from the big. Bees find heat in movement, stings land on skin that pulses. Kelling's hand hit Rule's shirt and then the first dozen stings found the back of Kelling's neck like they knew his name. He bellowed, a bowl sound. He let go. Sumner yelped and clapped the blanket to his head. Master March shouted something that did not matter. Ben jerked his wrists against the ropes and made one tear in one wrist that promised a second if he could find it. Rule felt bees in his hair and on his cheek and his body did the right thing. He went still. He had taught himself that in 100 small panics with a veil and smoke. Go still and the stings lessen. Move and you become a map for pain. He stood in the center of the yard as if he had been planted there in spring, and around him the air turned black gold. Someone knocked a lantern. Flame licked straw. The storm decided then that it would rain, in a hurry and without grace. Kelling swung and missed, grabbed a shovel like a club. Bees ate his wrists, his temple. He swung again. Rule ducked then, not because he was brave but because wood shaped like that will break a skull if you let it. Stop! Master March hollered, for the first time using his voice like he thought he commanded the air itself. It did not stop the bees. Nature does not heed men like him. Rule's rope lay at his feet like a snake with its head cut. He kicked it toward the second row and it snagged as ropes do when you most need them to say yes. A woman screamed because a sting had found her eye. Two men tore off shirts. Somebody laughed in that bright, cracked way people do when the world shakes loose. Ben wrenched his wrist again and found the same tear and made it a path. The seventh knot loosened. He sucked blood from his palm and spat it on the post, and his mouth tasted iron and honey both. Kelling came for Rule. The shovel whistled. Rule did not have time to think. He had time only to lift his own arms and turn his shoulder and take the edge across the meat instead of the bone. The pain lit up his arm like a bell struck. He grunted, and for a heartbeat his stillness broke. Bees along his jaw said no with their little knives. Lightning showed every face all at once as if God had taken a photograph. In the white glare Rule saw Sumner's eyes, and they were not cruel, only confused. He was a boy on the brink of men. He saw Letty, teeth bared like the memory of a different life. He saw Master March, hat knocked askew, mouth open on a note called shock. The rain came in a sheet. Bees hate heavy rain as much as men do. The air thinned of their bodies as they dove toward the hives in instinctual truce. Rule felt the change on his skin like a fever breaking. He seized the rope with his aching arm and hauled the rest of the gates down, not with cunning but with stubborn muscle. The second row blew open and filled the yard again in a new storm. Kelling roared and swung. The shovel struck a post and rang. Ben's second knot came free. He turned, a new animal, and planted his feet to pull on the last. Two more men, Ray among them, with his healed back a map of winter, stepped forward without looking at one another. They did not make a plan. They simply moved. Rule stepped backward into the shadow of the brush fence. He could not feel his left shoulder. The bee's song was inside his skull. Kelling came into the shadow with him, and for a breath they were two bodies in a narrow world, and Kelling's face up close was not rage but calculation. "You little bastard," he said in a tone that sounded almost admiring. "I should have cut your hands." A body hit Kelling from the side. Rule did not see whose. The shovel went spinning. The rope under Rule's foot slid. The last of the gates on the far hive, the one with the queen he called mistress, fat and sure, stuck. He knew her hum from all the others as you know your own blood step climbing a stair. He knew if he did not loose that gate the bees would ball up and smother themselves against the jamb. He moved toward it because saving lives is the only way he knows to breathe. Kelling's hand snagged his shirt and held like iron. "Think, boy," Kelling hissed, voice close enough Rule could smell his breath, sour with brandy and pain. "If you've made yourself a devil, you must finish as one. No half measures. Men die in half measures." Even then, the overseer taught. Rule saw the stuck gate and the queen inside, felt her with his skin the way blind men know the edges of a room. He saw Ben's wrist bleeding like a proof. He saw the storm doing what storms do best, cleaning nothing, just moving. He closed his own hand on the plug of the jammed gate. Kelling's grip tightened. The yard held its breath in rain. The bees in that box rose toward the slot like a city pressing a door. Rule pulled. And the wood groaned. And the plug gave. And the gate. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Gate fell like a jaw unhinged, and the hive exhaled its fury. A sound like torn silk rushed from the box as bodies poured through the slot, a living spill of black gold that thickened the rain to something that stung and sang. Rule's fingers slipped off the plug as the first veil of bees washed his knuckles, and he kept himself still with the stubborn patience he had taught his own blood: bee stone, bee tree, bee hive scent, and quiet breath. Kelling's grip faltered. Stings pricked his cheekbone, lip, the tender fold below the ear. He swore and snatched back, batting at the air. In the center of the yard the storm and the hives spoke over each other, thunder and wing, pain and instruction. Ben made his last pull and the rope snapped loose. He staggered forward into the rain, wrists torn and slick. Ray was there, not looking at Rule, not looking at anything but the knot he seized, the knot he broke with a butcher's quick hands. "Run," someone cried, and someone else said, "No." Still, and both were right, because the world had narrowed to choices you could not make clean. Rule moved alongside the brush fence, a ghost in his own making. He felt the bees along his scalp like a crown of needles and thought without words, steady, steady, steady. He angled his body to shield the queen hive as the swarm found its angry sky, and with his good arm he tipped the rain-wet plank so returning workers could find their door when fear passed. It comforted him, ridiculous in the chaos, to keep to the small vows he had made them. I will not abandon you, not even in my rage. Kelling came again, blind with pain, shovel forgotten, hands open like a man ready to strangle the storm. You think this saves you? He hissed, voice raw. You think bees change a map? They change a night, Rule said, barely moving his mouth. He didn't look at Kelling, he watched the colonies flow, gauged when the worst of the hot swarm would lift and when steady rain would force them home. Master March had retreated beneath the porch awning, one hand on Sumner's collar to keep the boy from walking into the churn. His other hand held brandy, because he could not help it. Make it stop, he yelled toward Rule as if the boy tuned weather. By God, make it stop. Rule did not answer him. He lifted the smoker he had stashed at his foot, already lit, moss smoldering under a tin lid, and pulsed 2 soft breaths toward the hive mouths in sequence, 1, 2, 3. The smoke bellied and softened the edges of frenzy where it touched. Enough of the bees remembered him even in their rage to release him from their sowing of pain. They banked, circled, broke on Kelling and the other men who flailed. Get in the house. Master March barked to no one in particular and everyone at once. Some of the white folks obeyed, skittering across the yard with aprons over their heads. Others stayed because anger, like pride, resists shelter. Rule backed toward Ben. This way, he said into the corner of his mouth without turning his face, because turning one's face turned one's skin to stings. He took 2 sideways steps, and Ben, shock stiff, took 2. Ray took one and then another, never touching them, simply shaping a space. Letty's voice reached through the rain like a line thrown from a boat. Kitchen door, she called, low but fierce. Through the kitchen, pantry window, yard beyond. She could not point. She could only aim sound. The bees thickened around Kelling again as he charged. His boots slipped in the mud, he went to a knee, swatting with the whole of himself. Rule felt a hot stab in the tender meat of his throat and fought the impulse to claw at it. Breath is quieter than pain, he told himself, an old lesson. He made the kitchen door and shouldered it with his good side. Letty stood there as if she had been rooted in the threshold her whole life just for this moment, cheeks wet from rain and not from anything else. She shoved a sack into his belly. Take, she said. Bread and ginger. Go. Ben stumbled past into the gloom, bumping the table that had known children's door rolling and nighttime weeping. Ray followed, back bowed like a boat's hull. Rule paused 1 heartbeat too long, eyes on Letty's face. Come, he said. She shook her head once, a movement so small it might have been a twitch if not for the iron under it. I got eyes on me always, she murmured. I move now, they burn it all and call it justice. I'll be where I am and not where I ain't. Go. He wanted to argue the world into sense. He remembered he was a boy. He remembered he had a job. He nodded and slid past, into the pantry, into the narrow window that breathed out onto the root yard. Ben squeezed through like a berth. Ray, broader, turned sideways and left skin on the sill and did not make a sound. Rule went last, clutching the sack in the smoker, body thrumming with stings. Rain stitched the little yard beyond into tatters of steam. The fence there was lower, beyond it, the cane break began, and beyond that, if you knew your lines, the canal cut and the brick wharf where Jonah Pike sometimes became a fact. They ran not fast but low, the way foxes move when shots are behind them. Ben was already staggering. Ray caught his elbow and made a cradle of his arm without the intimacy of comfort, practical, forward. Rule kept to the left edge where the ground was sandy and would record fewer truths. He counted to keep his breath from shattering. He counted frames, and brood, and the spaces between words he had learned on wax. Behind them, Kelling's voice ripped the rain. After them. Dogs. Bring the dogs. The word dogs split men different ways. Some freeze because bodies remember chains. Some speed because bodies remember what it takes to outrun noses. Rule swallowed the bolt of terror the way a man swallows vinegar, on purpose, to change the mouth. Dogs. Nose and teeth in memory. He thought faster than his fear could run. "Honey," he said, panting. "Smear." He ripped the sack open and grabbed a heel of bread, tore it, dipped his fingers into the jar Letty had tucked beneath. He slathered honey on his wrists, on Ben's bleeding palms, on Ray's split knuckles, and then flung the rest into a thorn tangle to their right, high and messy. The rain would not wash sweetness away at once. If the dogs had any sense of delight left in them, they would argue with themselves about which trail was truth and which was feast. Ray gave him a glance that contained the beginning of a smile. "Boy thinks like water," he muttered. "Always a way around the stone." Rule angled them toward the canal, not the straight path he knew best but a second line through sedge where beef forage grew wild, gallberry, pepperbush. He knew that brush like he knew his own hand. Twice he crouched and listened, and twice the rain filled his ears with nothing but itself. At the canal cut the storm had quieted to a traveling mist. The wharf crouched ahead, dark and low, pilings spiked like old teeth. No boat. But boats come most when you don't deserve them. This is how the river teaches men humility. Rule put Ben beneath the wharf, where the mud went to black and the smell made eyes water. "Wait," he said, unnecessary, because waiting was all the body could do when it had been owned all its life and suddenly had to own itself. "I can't swim," Ben whispered, apology where no apology belonged. "You can float if you need to," Ray said without romance. "Men float when their hands are free." Rule crawled to the edge of the pilings and risked a whistle, once, low. He waited the space of 30 heartbeats, then whistled again, a note 2 measures higher, the way Jonah had taught him years compressed into weeks. The river answered with frogs and the tick of rain, the strange hollow boom of thunder far upriver. "Rule," Ben said, a child's tone in a man's throat. "If the dogs come and we ain't got boat, you go. You run B-ways. You keep your reading for the ones ahead." Rule looked at him and felt a heat behind his sternum that had nothing to do with stings. "We go together," he said. "Bees don't leave the queen." Ray made a soft sound. "And who's queen here, little man?" "The thing we owe," Rule said. He didn't know he knew it until it was out of his mouth. "Call it the next breath." Water licked against wood. A shape separated from fog, the ratty sail, Jonah's patient ghost. The boat nudged the pilings with the tenderness of a thief who knows the house he's robbing better than the owner. Jonah's voice came not loud but shaped exactly for their ears. "You picked a wet sermon, boys." Rule felt his chest go loose. "Dogs," he said. "Then we don't preach long." Jonah's hands appeared, rope coiling over a post, and then his boat was hooked by a neat twist, and then he was handing down a tarred canvas. "Wrap the man with the torn wrists. Blood sings too loud." He glanced at Rule, eyes flicking over the stings that made the boy's face a map of bright punctuation. "You stirred a hive." "I used what I had." Rule helped Ben roll under the canvas. Ray slid on hands and knees, breath sawn short. "Letty," Rule said. Jonah's mouth went into that thin line that sometimes meant heartbreak. "We carry who's here, not who our hearts ache for. Cast off." He shoved the boat with a leg, shoulders working like oars themselves. The current caught them, tucked them into the canal's dark run. "You know how to be small," he added without looking back. Rule could not help the ghost of a smile. "Been studying my whole life." They went with water. The canal fed the river fed the night, and dogs fed on confusion behind them. Once a horn sounded in the wrong direction because honey does to noses what lies do to ears. The shore slid past in black braided with lighter black, trees leaning like listeners. Rule manned the second pole when Jonah nodded. He had watched enough to move quiet. Ray kept his hands on Ben to remind him of his shape in the dark. When they made the bend where the canal threw itself into the river proper, Jonah flattened them with a gesture and let the current do its cold work. The main water spoke in a voice so broad it might have been the first voice and the last, and the boat consented to be carried like a leaf, like a plan that knows to bend. Lights flared once on the north bank, the patrol's flatboat, but the storm made even white men sensible. They'd belly their coals and curse and wait for dry fire. Rule and Jonah did not speak except when hands needed translation. Hours went. The rain diminished to a fine breath, a blessing thin as mercy. Ben slept the way men sleep when they have nearly been lost. Ray watched the sky as if letters had been written there for him alone. Dawn smudged the east with ash. Jonah worked them into a backwater where cypress hunched like old women. He made a sign neither church nor boat uses, and a figure rose from the reeds, a woman in a coat slicked with fish oil, mouth set, eyes hard enough to cut rope. "You're early," she said. "Trouble's clock runs fast," Jonah said. "You got room?" "For 3.5 souls." Her eyes flicked over Rule, stings and all. "I don't take children." Rule raised his chin. "I'm older than the river thinks." She did not soften. "Older than the law cares." She jerked her head to the left. "There's a shanty on pilings in the next cove. You'll lay low there. Eat. Then I'll teach you a road the dogs won't risk. It's made of water and ghosts." She spat into the river. "Name's Mags." They shoved off, slid, bumped, halted in a skinned place where the mud had never learned grace. Mags whistled and two shapes unlatched the shanty door from the inside. A boy with hair like moss looked at Rule and saw himself. A woman with a baby tied up in cloth took Ben's elbow the way a mother takes a fever's elbow. Inside smelled of smoke and onion and the slow sweet of boiled cane. Rule stood in the low room as if it were a church. When someone put a cup in his hand he didn't drink at once, he tried to understand standing. Jonah leaned on the doorframe and watched him with that half-smile that never quite arrived. "You ain't done," Jonah said softly enough that only Rule heard. "Men like Kelling don't quit when their pride's been stung. He'll bend his herd into iron. He'll come. The river's a road for you tonight. For him, it's a mirror he'll try to break." "I know." Rule's good shoulder had gone from numb to a dull meat ache. His face felt like a hive diagram. His heart was steady and busy. He looked at Mags, at the boy who looked like him, at Ray's hands on Ben's new-wrapped wrists. He thought of Letty in the kitchen he had left behind and felt something in him insist on an impossible geometry, to go forward and also back. He slept then, because the body rules the spirit after a hard night. He slept with the bees hum holding him, though there were no bees in this room, only breath and wind against the slats. In dreams a queen threaded her way through a crowd of men and did not alter her pace. He followed her. He woke with the taste of wax in his mouth and a certainty laid down like a new comb. He was not done with Marchfield. He had not unleashed a hive for escape alone. The place Mag showed them was not on any map Master March would ever hold. It was a lace of water between islands of swamp, a road that changed each week so no man could memorize it into a weapon. "You go up here," she said, pushing a pole that obeyed her the way trained animals obey. "You take the row where the duckweed looks new, not old. You use your eyes, not your courage. Courage is loud. Eyes are quiet." Ben and Ray would go on this road, from shanty to shanty, from fish camp to mission house tucked where only seasons knew it. They would go because if they stayed and the dogs found them, the whole web would tear. Rule would take them as far as the second bend, and then, he told his own heart this as if it were a stubborn heifer, he would turn back. "Back?" Ray said when Rule told him. He didn't raise his voice. He just turned the single word into a hand on Rule's chest to test the heartbeat. "You owed enough already." "I started something I did not finish," Rule said. "Ben is free because the night was noisy. The night will quiet. Kelling will sew the edges tighter. Letty will be the thread he pulls until the garment rips." He swallowed. "I can't leave her in that sound." Ben shook his head. "You go back, you die." "Maybe," Rule said. "Maybe I make the dying take its time. Maybe I make a road out of it." He looked away so they would not see the childish thing in his eyes, the want to be more than a boy. Jonah didn't argue. He just pulled at his lower lip with 2 fingers and then let it go. If a fool is going to do a brave thing, it helps if he's clever. You're clever. I hate it. He looked at Mags. You got sugar? Always. She ducked into a corner and dragged out a small keg that smelled of fermentation in kitchens. Why? We're going to paint some dogs. Jonah's grin finally arrived, slant and mean and fond. He turned to Rule. You carry the river north in your head now. That's yours. But your bees are your hands. If you go back, you better carry a sting in each finger. They planned a plan that would look like chaos to anyone who didn't know the taste of honey. Rule would go back along the cane break's edge at dusk on the second day, when the bees were a little lazy and men, tired. He would skirt the workers' path, angle through the orchard's shadow, and come to the hives as if he had never left them, as if a boy could walk out of his own night and back into what men thought he was. He would keep his face dull as wood, his shoulders humble as rope. If Kelling sees you, he'll hang you quick, Ray said. He won't see me first, Rule answered, and felt the lie and the truth of it twin together. He'll feel me, the way men feel weather. Mags rolled a honey jar between her palms as if it were a scrying stone. You go in, you make your mischief, you get Letty if you can, you get the boy if he will go, and you get out by the picket fence through the trash ditch, the one white folks don't see because they don't smell their own stink. We'll have a skiff in the reeds by the old cypress after moonrise. You miss it, you're on your own until next dark. She fixed him with a look that made his bones behave. No hero. No speeches. You move like a man carrying a candle in kerosene wind. Rule nodded. I know how to walk with flame. He left at afternoon and arrived in twilight. Marchfield looked like a painting that had been wiped with a dirty rag, same shapes, wrong light. The hives still kept their corner of order. One box bore signs of the night's violence, scattered bodies like punctuation at the base, but most had settled back into the disciplined hymn of survival. He wept then, a quick yank behind his eyes, not for people but for the creatures he had taught to trust him. I'm here, he whispered to them, ridiculous and true. I will pay what I owe. He moved with a bucket on his shoulder and a coil of rope at his waist like any boy about work. He went to the kitchen door and knocked in the old pattern. Letty opened on the second knock and breathed his name with her mouth closed, only her eyes saying it. Fool, she mouthed. Maybe. He ducked in. The kitchen glowed with late light and hurt. Where's the boy? Sumner's got fever where he was stung on his neck, she said, voice low. Not bad. Scared him some. He asked after you. The master told him you'd been eaten by your own insects. As if that made a tidy story. Her lip curled. Kelling? Wears his hat to hide his swelling. Carries his hurt like a badge. He's been to the quarter twice today, taking count, asking sideways. He sent for a man with dogs from upriver. They're coming tonight. She sliced something for pie without looking at it. You're sand in his teeth, boy. He'll grind you just to feel the grit. Come, Rule said, because he had said it to himself 100 times and it was greedy to say it aloud and cruel to keep it, and he said it anyway. Tonight. After they sleep. She moved her knife through the air and laid it down like a law. I told you. I am a fixed star here. If I move at the wrong hour, everything that orbits goes wild. There's a baby 2 houses down whose mother needs me. There's a girl in the laundry who hasn't bled right in months. There's an old man with the shakes who will die on the floor if I leave him alone in the dark one more night. You think freedom is a straight road. It's a web. If I pull my strand, what tears? His mouth went dry. He had thought himself brave, and maybe he was, but bravery that does not look outward is just a boy wearing a drum. Then I made Kelling busy, he said, small again and practical. Busy enough men can move on the other edge. Letty's eyes narrowed. You carry a match in your pocket. I smell it. I carry bees. He pointed with his chin toward the orchard. They trust me again. That trust is a holy thing. Don't turn sacrament to sin. I won't burn them, he said, not sure if he meant the bees or the people. I'll make noise the way rain makes white men patient and bored. He reached into his shirt and drew out a small twist of paper, letters so thin they were almost insinuation, North Ditch, Trash Run, After Moon. He slid it under the flower bin where a hidden nail would catch it for a hand that knew to look. Letty pressed his wrist once, hard. You keep your face dull. Go. He went the long way around the yard and found Sumner on the porch with a damp rag on his neck, lower lip caught between teeth. He was alone, which meant danger. Boys alone hear their own thoughts. Some of those thoughts are dangerous because they are true. Rule stood at the bottom step. You all right? Sumner blinked, guilty and relieved and proprietary, the way boys are when pets return. You're not dead. Not yet. I told Father you wouldn't be, Sumner said, sitting up straighter. Bees like you. They like order. I give them that. Rule kept his voice small, respectful, true and not true. You should keep away when they're hot. They don't know your name. Sumner's eyes went to the yard as if reading it for a first time. Kelling says you started it. Kelling starts most things he blames, Rule said, and then cursed himself for not keeping his inside voice leashed. But Sumner did not flinch. He thought about it, head cocked like a jay. Will they die? The boy asked, nodding toward the hives. Some will. Rule swallowed. Winter's tax came late for them. But the queens still walk. The brood still warms. They'll make more life from loss. That's their work. He paused. What's yours? Sumner looked at his hands, boy-soft. To be master, he said, but the word sounded ill-fitting in his mouth, like a boot on the wrong foot. Rule nodded at nothing. Then learn to keep what lives. He backed off the step. Tell nobody you saw me. Sumner did not promise. He didn't have to. He had heard a thing he would worry like a tooth. Night fell. Rule went to the hives as if to pray. He brought smoke in a small wedge to ease any swollen doors, and he brought the new cords he had cut at Mags's to rig beneath, not to unleash, but to guide. He had learned something from Wrath, not to spend it cheap. He did not drop the gates. He tied them to the smallest finger of his plan. When the dogs came, two lean creatures with a handler from upriver whose eyes had turned into pits from looking too long at suffering, Rule was in the shadow behind the tool shed with a jar of mashed sugar and an old rag. He dipped the rag and flung it to the left across the fence where the ditch began, then again, farther, downwind. The dogs pulled, fought each other, argued with joy and duty until the handler cursed. Kelling, swollen and spectral in the moon's poor light, stood with his hat low and his patience high. Find me the boy, he said. Not the fat ones who ran last night. The boy who promised himself he was bigger than us. Rule slid along the brush to the hives and tightened his body into the calm that bees recognize. He pulled once on the new cord. The first hive half opened its door, just enough to spill a warning cloud that hovered at shin height and then settled like a watch. He pulsed smoke, 2 soft breaths. They wove the warning back into their door. He waited, let them taste him, hear him, remember who he was. Then he made his sin. He walked across the yard into the open, slow, as if sent to fetch water. A man in shadow near the kitchen took a step. Rule did not turn his head. He made for the well. He dropped the bucket, heard it bump water, heard water speak back. He hauled hand over hand, steady, as if he had never done anything in his life but this true chore. He poured the first bucket into the kitchen cistern where women would be grateful in the morning if morning allowed gratitude. He dropped the second. He hauled. The dogs tilted their heads and took his shape into their noses and didn't know what to do with it because it smelled like a thing the day had always known. Boy! Kelling's voice cut. There he is. Rule did not run. He kept hauling a useless bucket. He needed Kelling's eyes on him, all of them, so the yard's other edges could move. He needed to be the story men told so other stories could slip past unremarked. He set the second bucket down gentle, turned, lifted his chin just enough to bare his throat where the night's old sting had made a welt. You called, he said. Kelling came with a measured stride, the handler behind him, 2 men with batons flanking. Master March did not bother to come out, he would hear of it and make his brandy noises later. Kelling stopped with his toes almost on Rule's. He smelled of rancid fat and the bitter chemistry bodies make under fear that looks like power. You ran, Kelling said. I tended, Rule said. You loosed. I calmed. Kelling's lip lifted, more a spasm than a smile. You'll be clever for me. He shook his head as if at a child who had used the wrong spoon. Turn and put your hands on the well. Rule considered refusing. He considered the shovel, the rope, the easy cruelty of wood on skin. He put his palms on the stone because sometimes a man chooses the posture of submission to make room for the thing behind it. You respect the bees, he said to the wellhead, voice so even a blind man could have walked on it. Don't strike near their door. You'll put them into another storm. Merciful, Kelling said. To animals. He gestured to one of the flanking men. Hold him. The hand gripped Rule's shoulder and fire ran down his arm where the old blow had bruised and softened meat. He made a sound, small and angry, and the man held harder because men do. This is the price of stealing men, Kelling said, and raised his baton. Rule turned his head enough to look past Kelling, beyond the circle of men, to the kitchen's dark door. A figure slipped from it like a shadow deciding to be person, Letty, not leaving, but standing where leaving would begin. Farther off, near the trash ditch, another shadow cut, 2, then 3. The night had a seam. Kelling's baton came down. Rule took the first blow without an attempt to make a story of it, pain, light, breath, the body knows its ancient psalms. He did not cry out, not because he was brave, but because he was counting. 1. 2. On the third, he shifted his weight onto the cord between his feet and the hive fence. The cord whispered. The gate on the queen hive slipped a finger's width. Not enough to boil, enough to warn. Wings thick in the air at shin height. The handler's dogs whined and stepped back, then, idiot nobility in their bones, stepped forward again. The handlers swore and jerked their leads. Hold, damn you. 4. 5. Kelling's discipline found its old rhythm. Rule tasted copper and earth. 6. Between 6 and 7, a small sound left the hives like the sigh of a sleeping city turning over. Rule breathed into it with his whole being, a low hum in his throat that had calmed colonies in summer, in heat, in storm. He did not know if bees hear men, he suspected they hear weather that men carry. 7. Rule's knees went foggy. He bent, palms flattened on the cool ring of stone. He saw his face for an instant in the black water, a map of swelling, eyes bright. He thought, ridiculous and precise, queen must not be crowded. 8 did not fall. Someone shouted. The handler yelped as bees found his wrist. The dogs lunged and choked and then turned on each other with the confusion of beasts betrayed by their own noses. Kelling lifted his baton again and Rule, with the tiny bit of time chaos bought him, yanked the cord one notch more. A cloud uncoiled, low and purposeful. It washed over Kelling's boots and bit what it found. Christ! Kelling stamped. He struck blind into air. You little beast! He grabbed Rule's hair and yanked his head up and there it was, the moment that made nights hinge. Sumner stood on the porch in his nightshirt, one hand on the post, fever flush bright as a flag. He saw Rule's face. Rule saw him. Kelling's arm froze for the smallest fraction. Sumner saw more, the cord, the bees lifting like a thought becoming a choice, Letty in the kitchen mouth, men slipping toward the ditch with backs hunched and eyes wide. Father! Sumner cried, not in warning, but in decision. Father! Master March came to the door in his shirt and his foolishness. What is it now? He barked, already inconvenienced. He saw the yard arranged like weather, boy at the well, Kelling with weapon, dogs rioting, bees stippling the air with fury, his son's hand clenched on a post. He lifted brandy logic like a shield. End this, he told Kelling. Kelling obeyed the highest power he worshipped, his own intention. He drew back for a strike meant to conclude boys. Rule did the last wicked thing he had planned. He picked up the bucket and flung the water into Kelling's face. Cold. Wet. The scent of river. The bees rose to it like a gathered amen. They blanketed the overseer's eyes, crawled into the damp hair under his hatband, filled his mouth when he shouted. He forgot the boy. He clawed at his own head. He ran 3 steps blind and went down on knees already bruised by a life of kneeling to no one. The handler dropped the dog leads and used his hat like a fan. The dogs bolted, dragging lines like ruined sentences. Go! Letty hissed from the door, and Rule did not need instruction. He went. He snatched the cord with his good hand as he ran and pulled it once, hard, not to open gates, but to shut them. Bees will exhaust themselves for a bad reason if you let them. He would not. The doors thumped, little mouths closing. The cloud thinned. He sprinted, breath burning, and the yard turned into men with poor aim and better anger. The trash ditch stank. He loved it for that. 2 figures slid into it ahead, Ray, his shoulders making a dark grammar, Ben's wobble steadier now. Rule pitched himself over the low picket, landed badly, felt the electric announcement of a twisted ankle, bit it back. He crawled because crawling is a kind of dignity when standing is a lie. Letty did not follow. She shut the kitchen door with the finality of a woman who has accounted for her own cost. They were in the reeds and then the shallow black rush of the backwater, and then hands, Mags's cousin or friend or fellow ghost, caught them and heaved them into a skiff low as a rumor. You cut it close, the boatman said, grinning without teeth. Rule could not answer. He bent double and pressed his forehead to the floorboards and let the river strip noise from him. He wept then, quick and efficient, excess bled like sap. When he had breath he said, not yet. Others. The boatman shook his head. One more run breaks the whole rope. You got your handful. Not yet, Rule said again, because boys repeat truths until men hear them. There's a boy. He meant Sumner, and he hated himself for it, because the boy with safety built into his bones did not deserve any part of the road. He also meant the baby 2 houses down. He meant the girl in the laundry. He meant all the bees he had trained to build where they were not free to build. Tomorrow, the boatman said, not to be kind but to be true. Patterns save lives. You break them too hard, machines wake. He pushed off. The skiff slid into the black seam that stitched Wild to World. They lay up in Mags's second place, a shack that pretended to be driftwood. Rule slept with his ankle wrapped in his shoulder wrapped and his heart unwrapped, because it had grown larger than the room. Ray ate in small bites and watched the door. Ben slept, real sleep, the kind a body earns. Joan arrived near noon and nodded to Rule as if they had passed one another in a church aisle. What now? Jonah asked. Now, Rule said, we changed the map, not just the mile. He felt mad saying it, the way new queens must feel when they leave the box, the sky too big, the instinct too strong, the world insisting on itself. We don't just steal men from Marchfield. We make Marchfield bad business. He looked at Jonah with his whole plan unspooled behind his eyes, a wax tablet that had hardened. We turn the bees into a wage he can't afford. Jonah's eyebrows climbed. You're going to make honey expensive? I'm going to make cruelty cost. They started with small arithmetic. When Rule went back the next dusk he did not go to the yard. He went to the orchard's far edge and loosened the lid of the master's show hive by a finger's width so a raccoon would manage the rest. In the morning there would be a mess that meant labor. He walked the levee and cut 3 rope ties on the far gate so a calf would find a lucked freedom and wander at dawn in a way that looked like mismanagement. He moved a marker stone in the rice field 6 inches so the ditching crew would cut a line wrong and have to cut it again. He was sand in everything. He was wind that you cannot point at. He moved at night like bees in swarm, with purpose that looks like chaos to those who cannot read it. There were other hands too, emboldened by the memory of a yard turned to weather, Ray's, and the old man with shakes whose hands were steadier in darkness, and the girl from laundry who cut Kelling's bridle a single stitch shy of breaking. Letty did not move from her star, but you could feel her gravity, food where it must be, a rag in the right place, a word in Sumner's ear that sounded like a question he would not be able to stop asking himself. Kelling stalked like a storm that had missed its landfall. He punished where he could, questioned where he couldn't, and learned the wrong lessons from the world. Master March calculated cost in his head at night and drank more and blamed less because blame is expensive when it fails again and again. Rule's bees did not suffer for his campaign. He would not let them. He overfed the weak colony. He split one and gave half into a hollow fence post near the ditch so the backwater would have a humming sentinel. He kept his promises, never to cut life to make a point, never to turn living order into dead chaos. When he needed fury, he used men's. The river's road carried Ben and Ray and 3 more souls to the next house north, and then to the next. Word of a boy with bees traveled like a tune you can't unhear. It made some men brave and some men careful and some men meaner. It made Sumner quiet. He found Rule a week later by the hives, no hat, neck heeled to a mottled brown. Father says he'll sell the lot of you if there's one more trouble. Rule replaced a lid and watched a worker waggle a map onto the comb, sunlight broken into gold specks by her moving body. You believe him? Sumner swallowed. He doesn't like to lose. No one does. Rule turned. Do you like to lie? The boy flushed. No, a beat. But sometimes I do. Another beat. Sometimes I do so I can tell a truth later. Rule nodded. He did not reach for Sumner because touching across that air was a bridge that would collapse. Men will try to make you all one thing, he said. They'll call it being a man. That's a trick. You'll always be more than one thing. Learn to hold it without breaking. He lifted his chin toward the house. Tell your father Kelling is ruining his business. Don't tell him how. Just say the bees don't like him. Sumner laughed, then clapped his mouth shut as if laughter were a trespass. Bees don't choose, he said. They do, all day long. Rule's mouth twitched. Watch them. The reckoning found them on a night that had been hot too long and refused to consider change. Kelling had drunk in his quiet way, and he had talked to himself in the stable where horses flicked at flies, and he had put on his hat with a carefulness that meant harm. He took a lantern and a length of chain and he went to the hives not because anyone had told him to, but because the map in his heart said this was the country's center. He meant to burn the boxes and call it cleansing. Rule had not slept because weather speaks through walls. He was at the edge of the orchard when Kelling struck the first match. The flame took quick to oil an old propolis on the wood. Hives carry their own fuel. Kelling lifted the lantern and a face came out of the dark, Sumner's. Don't, the boy said. He sounded not like a master's son, but like a child with a bowl in his hands and a question too heavy for it. Kelling did not so much turn as shift the angle of his jaw. You go to bed. No, Sumner said, and the word landed in the orchard like a new kind of weather. Rule stepped out then because you cannot ask a child to stand alone in a fire. If you burn them, he said, you'll wake the whole yard. They'll swarm and sting your men. They'll kill your calves and sicken your dogs. You'll lose more coin than the comfort will buy. He did not plead. He accounted. Kelling regarded him over the lantern's small country of light. You think I count coins? I count obedience. He tipped the lantern. Flame licked the lid. 1,000 bodies boiled out and hit light, then Kelling's hands, then the soft at the corners of his eyes. He did not drop the lantern because some men would rather burn than let go. He took 3 steps with fire in his grip and then the world made a choice for him. The lantern burst, oil leaping like an accusation. The first hive face went to flame. Rule did what his bones knew before his mind agreed. He ran into fire. He dragged the lid from the burning box with his shirt wrapped around his hand, shoved it aside, blew, then realized like a slap that he was blowing life and death both. He grabbed the smoker he had hung in the shadow of the fence and rammed moss into it with fingers that did not belong to a smart boy, they belonged to an animal. He pumped smoke, heavy, wrong for midnight, and he sang low. I'm sorry, he said to the bees, to the night, to his mother, to no one. I'm sorry. Go down. Go down. Sumner was there, God help him, a child with a bucket slopping water that did almost no good and all the good in the world. Rule took the bucket and poured along the hive's base, not the lid. You starve a fire at its mouth. The second hive began to catch because fire likes copying. Kelling laughed then, a cracked, hurt sound, and raised the chain like a priest with wrong sacrament. Something moved in the dark. Ray. And behind him, 3 men and a woman and a boy who should have been asleep. They did not come for speech. They came for the work of stopping. Ray hit Kelling low, the chain went one way, Kelling went another. A heel struck Kelling's temple, the old man with shakes had aimed true, and the overseer's eyes went soft for the first time in his life. The woman, Mags's cousin, Rule realized in the high corner of his brain that still kept a ledger, kicked dirt onto the fire with her bare feet like she had been born to out-argue flame. Water. Letty's voice knifed, and then she was there with 2 pails and 2 girls behind her, and the entire night moved like a single animal, each part trusting the other without name or bond. It rained, suddenly, as if the sky had been waiting polite to be invited. The flames bowed, hissed, sulked, died. Kelling rolled and made a sound like a calf being taught a lesson it did not deserve. He tried to rise. Ray's hand put him down again, and this time there was the specific mercy of restraint in it. He did not break Kelling. He just told his body no. Master March arrived late, shirt open, hair wild, pistol in hand he could not reasonably use. He saw his yard as a parable he was unequipped to read, his son with mud to his knees, his bees half-cooked and half-saved, his overseer pinned by men who had decided not to be gears, the cook he could not afford wiping soot from her cheek, Rule with a smoker like a censer and eyes lit by more than fire. "What is this?" March demanded, not because he needed an answer but because men like him cannot stand questions. Rule straightened, steam coming off his shirt. He was shaking so fine only the bees would have noticed. He tucked the smoker under his arm and met the master's gaze as one meets weather. "This is your reckoning," he said, and surprised himself with how little heat the words carried. He was too tired for heat. Not with God. With accounts. You have run dogs and men and ledgers in the land like they were one thing. They are not. You keep them all, or you lose them all. He gestured small toward the hives where smoke curled up like admonition. You burn what gives you sweetness. You wind your spring until the clock breaks. Bees won't live in a hand that shakes. Neither will we. Master March lifted the pistol halfway, then let it sag. He stared at Sumner as if the boy might prompt him with a line. Sumner did not. Sumner's hands were open and empty. Kelling gathered himself into a crouch, spitting blood, eyes fever bright. "Hang him," he croaked, meaning Rule, meaning Ray, meaning all of them. "Hang them all." He struggled to his feet and swayed and aimed his body at Rule with the inevitability of a thrown thing. "No," Sumner said, and the word was not a child's or a man's. It was a note in a web, a place where routes changed. "No," he said again to his father this time, to the pistol, to the story. He stepped between Kelling and Rule with his thin chest and the welt on his neck in a shaking that had nothing to do with bees. "You hired him," he said to his father. "You can fire him." March looked between his son and his overseer and saw, maybe for the first time, the difference between fear and power. He saw the cost. He saw the flames licking the edges of a hobby he had called profit. He saw Letty with ash on her cheek. He saw men who had saved him from a loss he would have blamed on them. He made a choice because the night had made it clear that not choosing would be more expensive. "Mr. Kelling," he said, voice flat as last year's bread, "you'll leave this place before dawn." Kelling laughed, a sound that promised all the roads north were watched and all the dogs fed. "You think I go because you say so?" He staggered toward the gate. "I go when I'm done." "You're done," Ray said, and he put a hand on Kelling's chest that was not violent. It was administrative. It moved a piece to the edge of the board. "You go now, and you don't look back." Kelling spat near Rule's foot, a small petty baptism. He touched the welt at his eye like a man memorizing what to hate. "I'll see you, B-boy," he said. On another road. Maybe, Rule said. But the road will see you first. Kelling went into the dark because the dark sometimes keeps men like him for a while. All of them watched the space he left as if it might fill with an answer. None came. Rain made a soft smacking sound as it fell from leaf to leaf. Master March's pistol hung absurd and ended at his side. He looked at Rule and seemed to find a human he had not accounted for. "You will fix the hives," he said, trying to pull the world back into his grammar. "I will," Rule said. "And I will keep the bees as I have kept them. But the rest changes." He lifted his chin a little, enough to feel like sin, enough to taste leadership on his tongue and not spit it out. "You will stop night patrols for dogs. You will stop the lash for spoons. You will let men keep the whole of their Sunday, not the half that suits your table. You will pay Letty twice what you give her now in meat and meal and coin where coin is needed. You will sell no child from his mother as long as the bees live here. If you don't, I'll make your sweet a bitterness no buyer will touch. Silence is a violence and a mercy." The yard held it a long moment. Ray's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Letty folded her arms and became a court. March tried to laugh and found nothing to push air over. "You negotiate," he said. "I read." Rule let the words stand like a stake. "And I count. And I keep. Choose." Sumner's eyes were so wide they hurt to look at. He was watching a new country being drawn around him in lines only he, and perhaps Rule, and perhaps Letty, and perhaps every man who had ever stepped off a boat and called a place home, would remember clearly. Master March looked at his son and then at his bees and then at the dark where Kelling had gone. He made a series of faces men make when they are dividing loss by pride and adding what is left of fear. "For a span," he said finally, like a man buying time. "We will try your terms." "For a span." Rule nodded once. He did not thank him. He did not smile. He bent and righted a lid and pressed it home with a palm that would be blistered in the morning. He moved to the next and did the same. The night took back its breath. It did not end tidy. It never does. Kelling loitered upriver for a week gathering himself into a second harm and was taken by men who had wanted him for other reasons. March tried twice to pull back a concession and twice Rule turned a valve, honey left to ferment in a batch, a buyer educated by an anonymous letter about a new taste for refusing cruel jars, and each time March did his arithmetic and chose to save face by saving money. Sumner asked questions his tutors could not answer and spent his afternoons by the hives learning a language that had been available all along. Letty did not leave. She did not need to. She declared her kitchen a sanctuary on Sundays and no one would risk the taste of the week to cross her threshold with a weapon. The girl in laundry bled better. The baby found a laugh he had been withholding. Rule wrote less and spoke more, but he kept wax tablets beneath the floor for the sort of messages only wax can hold. He taught 2 boys to split hives and 2 more to mend the brushes on the pumps, because leadership that hoards skill is rot. He sat on the well with his stung throat healed to a new skin and felt the world tilt a degree toward air. He watched the queen in the hive he had saved establish her steady walk again among bodies who loved her with work, not music. On the day Jonah came with pears and sarcasm and news from north that tasted like clean shirts, Rule walked him to the fence and let the bees dust Jonah's hands with gold. "You made a place," Jonah said without looking at him. "No," Rule answered, "because men like him tell the truth when it makes them small. We found the edge of a place and held it." He paused. "For a span." "For a span," Jonah agreed. He smirked at the hives. "You going to be keeper here the rest of your life?" Rule watched Sumner talking to Letty on the porch, both of them gesturing with their hands in the exact same rhythm. He watched Ray fix a fence with deliberate contempt. He watched the river carry a leaf past as if it were a blessing and a warning together. "I'm going to be keeper until I'm not," he said. "And when I'm not, someone else will be. That's the point." He lifted the smoker, pulsed 2 breaths, and the bees rose and settled, a way of saying yes that had more dignity than cheers. He had wanted revenge and gotten arithmetic, wanted escape and gotten a web, one at a night and got in a season. He was a boy and a man, and he could hold both without breaking. Years later, men would tell the story out of order. They would say the boy unleashed the hive and burned the house and ran north and became a preacher, or a soldier, or a president of something invisible. They would make a banner of his name or tear it to rags, depending on their need. What mattered walked smaller, a cook with a quiet laugh who fed Sundays, a boy who learned to choose, an overseer who learned nothing and paid for it elsewhere, bees that survived a fire because a child loved them stubbornly. The world does not end when it changes. It hives, it splits, it swarms, it finds a new queen and then does the old work again, sweet and stung. That night, when Rule finally lay down on the honey house loft, shoulders sore in good ways, ankle tight, heart easy, he rested his ear to wood. The colony breathed. He closed his eyes and felt 1,000 small bodies believing in one direction. He smiled into the boards. Work, he whispered, the most revolutionary word he owned. Tomorrow. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.